Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Baker Institute. I'm Edward Juregin. I'm the director of the Baker Institute at Rice University, and I want to warmly welcome you all here this evening for this very special program. The chief architect of the Sputnik program was Sergei Korolyov, a truly great designer and engineer. He died in 1966, and we had invited one of his chief deputies to join us this evening, but his age, he is 95 years old, and his health precluded his joining us. He has, however, recorded a message about Korolyov and Russia's great achievement. Now, please join me in watching Sputnik, a 50-year legacy, a Baker Institute film production about the impact of Sputnik on the world, featuring commentary by George Abbey, our Baker Institute Senior Fellow in Space Policy and a former director of the Johnson Space Center.
On October 4th, 1957, the birth of the space race was ignited by a small 184-pound sphere launched into orbit by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This sphere, a satellite named Sputnik 1, was equipped with a small radio transmitter sending out signals from space. Sputnik took 96 minutes to circle the Earth, staying in orbit for 92 days. Its chirping sound was heard by the world. As Sputnik made its debut into space, the family sitcom Leave It to Beaver premiered. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. The United States was experiencing a time of prosperity and peace, feeling cozy and on top of the world, tuning in to TV, vacationing in big finned cars, becoming an auto nation with drive-ins, drive-thrus, mobile homes, going for convenience with automats, TV dinners, whipped cream in a can, being modern, educated with an eye toward traditional values. There was an awareness of the USSR, the Cold War, and nuclear threat, but the country wanted out from under the austerity of World War II and the Korean War, leaving the business of war in the background. Sputnik's launch shocked the country, bringing the awareness front and center. The Soviets showed a superior hand to the United States in science and technology and made us once again think about the nuclear threat. Sputnik became a shocking wake-up call. The man behind the launch of Sputnik was Sergei Pavlovich Korolyov, the designer of the R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile. The ICBM was first designed for the purpose of carrying missiles long range, but instead was used to launch Sputnik.
The Russians, I think, felt, that they could take on missions which would be really more observation and gathering knowledge and information from space, and so their emphasis was more in that area. They obviously had a very good rocket when they were able to launch Sputnik.
It was Korolyov who convinced the USSR to put the financial resources into building a satellite. The United States lacked a unified front in regard to a satellite system, which caused a lag in the development in that area.
Well, I think that we hadn't really put the emphasis on developing capability as the Russians had. They had individuals in Russia that were very capable and were very focused. In the United States, we were not focused that way. We had really didn't have a single group that was responsible for really getting us into space. I think you had the military services all working on it, but it wasn't a focused activity as it was in Russia.
Sputnik gave the United States the focus to get a space program in place. President Eisenhower wanted the program to be of peace and non-militaristic, but he also wanted to put on his game face and show that the United States was still in the race.
President Eisenhower reassures the nation that Russia's success with the first satellite does not indicate a serious lag in American rocket research.
I consider our country's satellite program to be well designed and properly scheduled to achieve the scientific purposes for which it was initiated.
I think there was concern about having a capability of putting weapons in space, so there were studies going on at that point in time in the military about those kind of systems. But the Congress and the administration formed a civilian agency really to pursue the space program, and that was led to the formation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So that mission and that role was given to a civilian agency because I think there was a feeling they didn't want to see weapons in space. So even though it was being studied, the general feeling was that was not something the country should do.
It was President John F. Kennedy that infused the space program with an enthusiasm to go forward, reframing the ideas, the purpose, and mission of space.
He envisioned that space would be pursued by the nations of the world in a peaceful fashion.
Kennedy presented his plan for the United States' future in a speech given on September 12, 1962, at Rice University.
There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
The legacy of Sputnik is vast. It has led to the creation of the manned space program, moon landing, Apollo, Challenger, the Mir space station, and satellites for communication, such as cell phones and internet, and watching weather and weather patterns. The avenues in space have become an integral part of our culture. But the question today, will the legacy of Sputnik continue? Will there be enough young people in the United States to carry on the legacy?
Well, I think that Sputnik brought about a focusing of activity here in this country, as I say, with National Aeronautics and Space Administration. But also, I think it led to a really greater emphasis and renaissance relative to young people going into science and engineering. And so I think with the excitement of space and with the goal of going to the moon, you had a lot of excitement on the part of the younger people in the country. They wanted to be a part of it, and so you had a good number of people really wanting to go into science and engineering, and I think that was a very good thing for the country. And I think if you look at these last 50 years, we have probably been benefiting from those individuals that went into science and engineering, because that was probably one of the great legacies of Apollo, is that you had that human resource that got us to the moon and allowed us to do the things that we have done in space. But they also provided the nucleus of people that have then pursued technology and gotten us into a leadership role in technology within the world. So I think that was one of the greatest legacies of Sputnik, that we were able to get that excitement and that interest on the part of the young people. And that has become a major problem in the country today.
For more information on this or our other programs, please visit www.bakerinstitute.org.
As Ambassador Derision said, we had invited Boris Chertok, who is one of the surviving deputies of Sergei Korolev, who is really the father of the Russian space program. And he really wanted to come, and he's a gentleman that is still working at age 95, and when I met with him in Russia, he said I had to get permission of his boss, because he goes into work every day, to come over here to the U.S., and he would like very much to come to Houston. But as it turned out, as the the ambassador said his health and age precluded that. But we do have a video that he has done that I think will give you a very good picture of the Russian program, and Roland was very helpful in being able to get this video for us. So if you could run that video, we'll see if we're successful at that.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, все дамы, леди и джентльмены, дорогие коллеги, вероятно, я один из очень немногих оставшихся еще в живых свидетелей, участников и разработчиков первого в мире искусственного спутника Земли. Запуск этого первого в мире искусственного спутника был осуществлен в Советском Союзе 4 октября 1957 года, 22 часа 28 минут 34 секунды по московскому времени. Впервые в истории человечества миллионы людей могли наблюдать в лучах зашедшего или восходящего солнца, перемещающейся по небе звезду, созданную не богами, а руками человека. Мировое сообщество восприняло появление первого в мире искусственного спутника Земли как действительно величайшее достижение, научное и инженерное достижение. Однако впервые научную основу, доказывающую возможность преодоления земной гравитации, доказали не мы, а великий Исаак Ньютон. Великий самоучка Константин Эдуардович Циолковский показал, что необходимая скорость может быть достигнута только при использовании принципа ракетного полета. Через 20 лет после публикации Циолковского в 1903 году это опубликовал свою работу, в 1923 году появляется первый в Западной Европе фундаментальный труд по ракетодинамике ракеты в межпланетное пространство, вышедший в Берлине и Мюнхене. Автором был профессор Герман Оберт, впоследствии один из известных пионеров ракетной техники и космонавтики. В Соединенных Штатах Америки американский ученый Роберт Готтард в 1919 году делает заявки и публикует труд «Метод достижения экстремальных высот». Создание высотной ракеты Готтард рассматривал как шаг на пути к космической ракете. В 1933 году советские ракетные специалисты, это московский ГИРД и ленинградская группа газодинамическая лаборатория, были объединены в Государственный реактивный научно-исследовательский институт, так называемый РНИИ. Исторически это был, пожалуй, важный шаг государства для развития ракетной техники. Однако ракетная техника Советского Союза и Соединенных Штатов Америки имела немецкое начало. В 1936 году в Германии началось строительство мощного научно-производственного испытательного ракетного центра Пенемюнде. Через 6 лет, в 1943 году, в Пенемюнде был совершен первый удачный пуск боевой баллистической ракеты дальнего действия А-4, получившей впоследствии пропагандистское название Фау-2, от немецкого слова «фаргельтунг» – «возмездие». В сентябре 1944 года начались массовые обстрелы Лондона ракетами Фау-2. Надо сказать, что несмотря на обилие скептиков, Сталин 13 мая 1946 года подписал постановление о создании в Советском Союзе ракетной отрасли науки и промышленности. В развитии этого постановления в августе 1946 года Сергей Павлович Королев был назначен главным конструктором баллистических ракет дальнего действия. Тогда, в 1946 году, никто из нас и не предвидел, что, работая с Королевым, мы будем участниками запуска первого в мире искусственного спутника Земли, а вскоре после этого и первого человека. В январе 1954 года состоялось историческое совещание главных конструкторов Королева, Бармина, Глушко, Кузнецова, Пелюгина, Рязанского с участием основных заместителей и главных разработчиков радиосистем контроля и управления Коноплева, Борисенко и Богомолова. Основным решением совещания был отказ от традиционного стартового стола. По предложению молодых проектантов предлагалось создать систему наземного оборудования с подвеской ракеты на специальных отбрасываемых фермах. Это позволяло не нагружать нижнюю часть ракеты и тем самым уменьшить ее массу. Необычным было решение о компоновке ракеты из 5 блоков с унифицированными двигательными установками. Центральный блок одновременно же был и второй ступенью. Но двигатели всех блоков запускались на Земле одновременно. Масса головной части с водородной бомбой была предварительно оценена 5500 килограмм. Для обеспечения заданной точности управления по дальности требовалось строго регламентировать импульс после действия двигателей. Эскизный проект ракеты новой, необычной компоновки был разработан и одобрен Советом министров Советского Союза 20 ноября 1954 года. Конструкция ракеты, одобренная экспертной комиссией, теперь хорошо знакома всему ракетному миру. В соответствии с постановлением правительства 12 февраля 1955 года в полупустыне в районе станции Чуратам началось грандиозное строительство научно-исследовательского испытательного полигона номер 5. С 1961 года это место весь мир знает как космодром Байконур. Строила армия. Главным строителем был генерал Шубников. В течение 1955-56 годов было наконец-то закончено изготовление первого технологического комплекта ракеты Р-7. Проведено его испытание на Ленинградском металлическом заводе совместно с реальной стартовой системой. На огневых стендах под Загорском, ныне это город Пересвет, были начаты огневые испытания отдельных блоков ракеты. В ней главного конструктора Пелюгина проводились моделирование, комплексная отработка системы управления. 14 января 1957 года Совет министров СССР утвердил программу летных испытаний ракет Р-7. Первая технологическая примерочная ракета была уже в январе отправлена в Тюратам на полигон. Королев, убедившись в срыве сроков по изготовлению первого искусственного спутника Земли, секретного блока, который мы называли «Объект-Д», в варианте космической лаборатории, выходит правительство с неожиданным предложением. Имеются сообщения о том, что в связи С Международным физическим годом Соединенные Штаты Америки намерены в 1958 году запустить искусственный спутник Земли. Мы рискуем потерять приоритет. Предлагаю вместо сложной лаборатории объекта D вывести в космос простейший спутник. Предложение Королева было принято, и 15 февраля Совет Министров выпустил постановление об изготовлении и запуске простейшего спутника ПС. Это блестящий сферический контейнер диаметром 580 мм. Корпус состоит из двух полуоболочек со стыковочными шпангоутами, которые соединяются между собой 36 болтами. Герметичность стыка обеспечивалась резиновой прокладкой. Спутник заполнялся осушенным азотом под давлением 1,3 килограмма на сантиметр квадратный. В верхней полуоболочке располагались две антенны длиной 2,4 и 3,9 метра, ну а также соответствующий пружинный механизм для их разведения. В контейнере был установлен радиопередатчик мощностью в 1 Вт. Он работал попеременно на волнах 7,5 и 15 метров. Питание проводилось от специально изготовленных серебряно-цинковых батарей. Емкость батарей была рассчитана на непрерывную двухнедельную работу. Общая масса этого простейшего спутника составляла 83,6 килограмма. Королев получил согласие Хрущева на использование 2 ракет для экспериментального пуска простейшего спутника. 17 сентября 1957 года на торжественном совещании, посвященном столетию со дня рождения Циолковского, с докладом выступил никому неизвестный член-корреспондент Академии наук Сергей Королев. Он сказал, между прочим, что в ближайшее время будут произведены пробные пуски искусственных спутников Земли. 22 сентября на полигон прибыла ракета 8К-71ПС, как мы говорили, изделие МПС. ПС – простейший спутник. Она была существенно облегчена по сравнению со штатными ракетами. Таким образом, стартовая масса ракеты ПС была облегчена почти на 7 тонн по сравнению с первыми опытными ракетами. 4 октября в 22 часа 28 минут 34 секунды по московскому времени был осуществлен старт. Через 295,4 секунды после старта спутник и центральный блок ракеты-носителя были на орбите. Это был всего 3-й успешный запуск ракеты Р-7, созданной для межконтинентального полета с термоядерной бомбой. Впервые была достигнута предсказанная Ньютоном первая космическая скорость. Она составляла для первого искусственного спутника Земли 7780 метров в секунду. Наклонение орбиты спутника составляло 65,1 градуса. Высота перигея 228 километров. Высота апогея 947 километров. Период обращения более 90 минут. Заменив термоядерную водородную бомбу маленьким спутником, мы одержали огромную не только научную, но политическую и общественную победу. Благодарю за внимание. Большое спасибо.
Well, I think academician Shertek said it very well. I think they did achieve a great victory, and a very impressive one, and certainly got the attention of the world. And as Ambassador Derision said, President Kennedy gave a speech here at Rice University 45 years ago, 5 years after the flight of Sputnik. And I don't think anyone in that audience listening to the speech at Rice Stadium would have ever thought that today we would have a Rice graduate, Peggy Whitson, and a Russian cosmonaut, Yuri Malenchenko, doing extravehicular activities together, working on a space station on a common program, working for a common goal. So we've come a long ways. So this evening we're going to talk about these last 50 years and the impact of Sputnik, but it's important also to look to the future, because I think we've demonstrated that international cooperation and working together is a much better way to do a program. And so as we look at the exploration programs in the future and go on to the stars, I think we should do it together. And I think our future endeavors hopefully will be done with international cooperation. I think we have a very distinguished panel tonight, and I'll leave it to Neil Lane, the moderator, to introduce the panel. Neil, of course, has had a very distinguished career here at Rice and certainly in the government. He was President Clinton's science advisor and director of the National Science Foundation, and is a great individual, and also works here at the Baker Institute as one of our senior fellows. So let me turn it over to Neil Lane.
Thank you very much, George. I think you all know George Abbey really has brought to us this program of space policy at the Baker Institute. We had nothing going in that area before George arrived, and it's now, I hope you would agree, a thriving, exciting program. This evening is just one example of what we have been doing here in the area of space policy and what's to come. I want to add my welcome to all of you attending this very special event. To many of us who made our careers in science, the Soviets launching of Sputnik 1 in 1957 and Sputnik 2 roughly a month later with an even larger payload, as you know, including the first dog, I think, in space, has come to symbolize the beginning of what we think of as a golden age of science in this country. Sputnik led directly, I think, to the establishment of NASA in 1958, to increases of funding of research and development and higher education. The National Defense Education Act, the NDEA, was passed in 1958, and a whole generation of bright, enthusiastic young scientists and engineers was a result. President Kennedy's moon speech in the Rice Stadium led to the Apollo program, to the spectacular moon landings, to the robotic planetary exploration missions, and more recently, in more recent years, to the shuttle program, the Hubble Space Telescope, and the International Space Station partnership that includes, as you know, the U.S., Russia, as well as Canada, Europe, and Japan. And I remember one of the very exciting things that happened when I was in Washington was the first part of the space station was launched. That was, I think, the Russian service module, as it was called. Prior to that time, all the pieces of the space station were in warehouses, but they finally were aloft, and the space station has gone together quite successfully since then. It's really amazing to me that over the last half century, during periods of nuclear stalemate between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the costly wars in Korea, Vietnam, the military buildups in the U.S. and Russia and different parts of the world, science has prospered, and nations were able to agree on a kind of hands-off attitude about space, where space would be used for peaceful purposes, and that is science and human exploration. So let's hope that continues to be the case. As George says, we are most fortunate this evening to have a panel of experts who know as much, perhaps more, about space than any individuals that one can think of. And so I'm going to ask them all to come to the table now and sit where your cards are, and then I'll briefly introduce them, and then I'll simply ask them to make their remarks in order. So, Roald, if you would be a leader, then all the panelists please come up at this time. So let me start with Raul Sagdayev. There's so much to say about each one of these individuals, and I will not say it. I will simply be brief. Raul Sagdayev is a distinguished university professor at the University of Maryland and director of the East-West Space Science Center. He was a key figure in science and space during Soviet times and was advisor to President Gorbachev, then as a reformer in the Congress of the People's Deputies. Eugene Levy is the Howard R. Hughes Provost and Professor of Physics and Astronomy for Rice University. Dr. Levy is internationally recognized for his research in planetary and astrophysics. Oleg Alifanov is the Dean of the Moscow Aviation Institute and serves on the Board of Directors of the International Space University and the Space Week International Association. I'll be slightly out of order here, but please bear with me. Vladimir Titov is a retired colonel in the Russian Air Force and a former Russian cosmonaut. He's been in 5, I think, space missions totaling over 387 days in space. He currently works for Boeing in Moscow. Sergei Leskov is a columnist for Izvestia, the leading Russian national daily newspaper, and he is known as the newspaper's expert on atomic affairs. And Sergei Avdeyev is the former cosmonaut and engineer with NPO Energia. At one point, he held the record for cumulative time spent in orbit, 747.59 days, nearly 12,000 trips around the Earth for a total distance of 515 million kilometers. So we're very pleased to have them. Please welcome them all. And I'll ask, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to ask Dr. Sagdayev to open with his remarks. You can make them from the table or here, whichever you prefer, and then let's just move down the table in order. Thank you.
Maybe I should... So much was said about launch of Sputnik. You saw the veteran of the program, Boris Chertok, speaking about his own experience. Actually, I have met Professor Chertok recently on the October the 3rd. There was a big event in Moscow in Spaso House on invitation from American Ambassador William Burns. And Chertok attended. We had, standing next to each other, keeping glasses of red wine. He's 95 years still, he's full of life. And he actually indicated that he would be unable to come probably to here. But he's driving his own car every day to his office. What he didn't say in this brief speech on DVD, he didn't mention that immediately following Red Army entering East Germany with Peenemünde captured by Soviets, he and a large group of Soviet young rocket engineers and scientists landed in Peenemünde to learn what Werner von Braun did. By that time, von Braun, with his top assistants, several dozens of them, already escaped with a cavalcade of big trucks to American sector of occupation, and he surrendered. And what Russians discovered in Peenemünde was virtually ruins after bombing by Her Majesty Air Force bombers. And there was only one man out of von Braun's core team left, a young engineer by the name Grotrup. He was number 3 in team of von Braun. He didn't leave because he had a very peculiar wife. She didn't want to move. And and then everything started from there. Korolev, Glushko, all the leaders of future Soviet rocket program you have seen on this video, they spent 1.5 years in Peenemünde. Assignment was to reconstruct from ruins, to build a new V2, and they were participants and witnesses how it happened. And then a year and a half later it was launched. was success. The only thing Russians didn't like that ethylene alcohol was used as a fuel. Russian soul could not accept it. So it was one of the first assignments after everything was relocated to Soviet soil. So now the question which historians would have to answer, what happened? The best brains came here, Werner von Braun himself, you know, Stullinger, you just name all these guys. Actually, Stullinger, I was told, still alive now. And Grotrup, who was number 3, and Ruins in Peenemünde led Russians with the first ICBM, R7, which was used to launch the Sputnik. So my personal tentative explanation is that Americans had a cozy life, as we heard in the first video, and in strategic terms, they felt kind of, you know, complacent because Stalin's evil empire was surrounded by forward-based American nuclear bases, Turkey, Scandinavia, you know, Japan, and there was no hurry to do something else on top of it. And the interesting thing Chertok said in interview published by Izvestia on October the 4th, interview which was taken by Sergei Liskov, columnist of Izvestia, who is present here. He said, "I'm an old man. I would be forgiven, but Stalin was the first to understand the importance of rocket." He probably felt that Russia has a strategic inferiority surrounded by forward bases, and the only rockets could, in his view, restore some strategic balance. So I think historians have to explain a little bit more about everything like that. So then was Apollo, which a competition for lunar race was first declared here at Rice University, and it was, of course, spectacular victory of American technology, American the technical engineering genius, and of course money which were, you know, delivered to this major project. So space race virtually ended at that moment. And I know from my conversations with Keldysh, who also was shown in this movie, he was a chief theorist of cosmonautic, but it was kept secret that this his position. And only later on it was disclosed. And he said that we considered we lost the race and we just tried to do something, you know, find our own ecological niche in space. It was going on until the perestroika, when Gorbachev changed the nature of Soviet Union, and now we have got this International Space Station. And I think there is probably no one on American side who contributed so much to the success of this joint enterprise as George Abbey, fellow of Baker Institute. And I have a pleasant duty on behalf of Federation of Cosmonautics of Russia. I would like Sergei Avdeyev to help me to fulfill this pleasant duty and to decorate George Abbey with the Gagarin medal of the first cosmonaut. This is a diploma.
I feel greatly honored and very humble in receiving this medal. I was very fortunate to have been involved with the program, and I think I had a lot of very good people on the Russian side and the American side that really made it happen. And I have enjoyed my association with my Russian colleagues, and the program and our activities today would not be going on as well as they are were it not for them. And so thank you, and I thank you for all you who have done to make the space program such a great program and making the International Space Station what it is today. So thank you.
This is an interesting event for me in sort of a personal way. 20 years and 2 months ago, I made my first trip to Moscow. And I made that trip in response to an invitation provoked by my friend Raul Sogdeev to attend the 30th anniversary celebration of Sputnik in 1987. If we had a long time this evening, I would regale you with the adventure of that trip. George asked me to do that. I have told him, but we don't have that much time. It was a really wonderful trip. And it was set like a jewel in a large complex of confusions that let me decide 3 days before the departure that I probably wouldn't go to this, and a set of confusion that was completely cut through by Raul. Something that I learned at 4 o'clock in the morning in Tucson, Arizona, when I received a telephone call. I don't know if you remember this. I received a telephone call from Louis Friedman, who's the executive director of the Planetary Society, calling me at home at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is not a pleasant thing. And so I groggily, I picked up the phone, and Lou said, Gene, did I awaken you? And I said, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Of course you awakened me. Why the hell did you call at 4 o'clock in the morning from Pasadena, California? And he said, well, I felt I had the right to awaken you because I just got awakened by a call from Moscow in response to your note that you probably wouldn't be able to make it. And the note is from Raul Sogdeev, and it said, Dear Gene, thanks for your best wishes, but we'd much rather have you here in Moscow. And so my plans were then turned upside down, and we embarked on just a wonderful, wonderful time in Moscow, a week-long symposium and celebration at the 30th anniversary of Sputnik, and it is something that I remember, along with many other things. I was 13 years old when Sputnik was launched. 4 months past my bar mitzvah, which had occurred in June. Sometime during the school year that followed, during 8th grade in junior high school, I decided that I was going to pursue a life of science as a physicist. That decision had absolutely nothing to do with Sputnik, and it had nothing to do with the opening of the space age. It was simply that I was intensely interested in science and physics. In fact, my decision about what area of physics to pursue, astrophysics and space physics, which ultimately led to my involvement with the space program with NASA, was not really made until graduate school 10 years later, 10 years after Sputnik was launched. But in a larger sense, and in a way that is, I think, very important socially and from policy and historical perspectives, in a larger sense, my life in science was impelled by the national and social environment of what has come to be known as the post-Sputnik era, opened in October of 1957. There had already been a substantial focus on and respect for physics associated with the post-World War II years, owing, of course, to the decisive roles that physics had played in the war effort, not just the nuclear bomb, which everybody thinks of, but other technologies such as radar and the proximity fuse, for example. Sputnik, the shock of Sputnik spurred the United States into an intense focus on science. I think Raoul has already referred to the sense that, of complacency that existed in the United States in the aftermath of World War II, to the general perception that we were so far ahead just by default that there was no threat, no danger of being overtaken. The Sputnik shocked the United States. I think even as a junior high school student, it was clear to me the intensity of that shock that overtook our nation. This had two significant effects on my life. The first and very important was that science, especially physics, as a result of this became sexy in the 1960s. There was some sense of mystic and esteem that flowed toward young males pursuing physics, especially from young females. And that did not at all diminish my enthusiasm for physics as a career. Did not diminish at all my sense that it would be a good idea to pursue this line of activity. In graduate school, the post-Sputnik era continued to follow me. It's in an interesting way. So I went through graduate school on a NASA fellowship, and the reality, the sense of that NASA fellowship as it was then, I think is very important, because the NASA fellowship that I received, and I received it by choice, I was offered several. I chose the NASA fellowship because it was a little more lucrative in some respects, was not at all limited to space science. There was no question ever asked about whether or not in accepting a NASA fellowship I was going to pursue anything related to space science. It was sufficient that I was going to be studying physics. This is very, very different, and I think in important and fundamental ways from the much more parochial attitude that the mission agencies, the mission science agencies, including NASA, follow today. In a sense, Sputnik defined a generation in the United States. It helped to impel extraordinary expansion in the physical sciences across all the disciplines, in part for the reason I just described. It helped to impel an extraordinary expansion of universities, not alone, but it helped. Great accomplishments in both human and robotic exploration of the solar system, investigations of the astrophysical universe, opened up before us like whole new vistas of opportunity and activity. It is clear that in 1957, the then Soviet Union truly did open a window onto a future and spurred the entire world to a remarkable and productive response. It is worth thinking about what we have today. For example, the technologies and the capabilities in space opened by that window revolutionized, for example, global communications. My recollection is that the 1964 Olympics was the first Olympics that anybody in the United States, first foreign Olympics, that anybody in the United States could watch in real time, live, because of satellite relay opened up by the beginning of the space age. It is interesting today, as I remarked in a talk down near Clear Lake last week, in 1900, Galveston was overrun by a hurricane on a clear blue day with no warning whatsoever. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina was known to be coming 5 days in advance with great precision and was tracked almost meter by meter as it approached Galveston. In science, we have opened up extraordinary vistas of solar physics, interplanetary physics, study of planetary magnetospheres, the nature of planets and planetary environments has been explored and elucidated. For example, as a result of the space age, that our sensitivity was awakened to the possibility of global change by understanding, for example, the enormous changes that Mars had undergone before we were thinking in any near as focused a way about the Earth. The clues developed from space investigations provided definitive new information about the origin of our solar system, the origin of our planets, explored the formation of stars and the origin of the universe. The space age has played a seminal role in providing answers to questions ranging from the origin and evolution of the universe to the origin of life. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the space age, opened by Sputnik in 1957, illuminates questions as old as human thought. questions that we human beings have been exploring in myths, in religions, in art and poetry and philosophy long before these questions were explored in science. And we now, through the benefits derived from the space age, have an opportunity to delve into those questions and find definitive answers that cut to the core of our human self-concept and illuminate and lift the human spirit. I want to just close with a couple of remarks, and George already alluded to the fact that the future is also important to think about as we think about the past. And in my view, the past is valuable for a number of reasons. I mean, we are products of the past, but not least, the past helps us inform and guide our approach to the future. We face some very serious challenges as we look ahead to the space program of the future. Our challenge is to launch another 50 years that live up to the example set by the previous 50 years. That's not a small challenge. We have just finished a glorious 50-year period of time, launched by the success of Sputnik. I hope, although it is not obvious as we sit here today, that the next 50 years will live up to the first. Certainly one of the most important ways that we can see and help the next 50 years achieve its potential is by approaching it internationally in the spirit of cooperation and partnership that has begun to grow over the last decade, or actually the last couple of decades. Thank you.
I think next is in the program is Vladimir Titov.
Okay. Hello. Everybody have a telephone? Okay. If not, I will continue in English.
It's great to see you here. This is not my first time at this university, and it is a great pleasure for me to meet more and more friends here. Today, of course, we celebrate a very important event, not only for people who sit here. This is a planetary event. And this is such a universal planetary event that the whole civilization of our planet will remember it forever. I cannot tell you how Sputnik was created. I was of a bit later generation. However, we remember those people who created Sputnik, and based on the experience of that generation, we were educated, we worked, we were inspired by. I'm talking about cosmonauts and astronauts who are flying now, and I'm one of them. I used to be. I say it is a huge honor to be here, and we have here American astronauts also. Sergei and me are the only cosmonaut representatives here, but I see astronauts here with whom we have been trained together, with whom we are friends. We've been doing the great business of flying in space together. It is great to see us together again here. Now, more and more in Russia and in the US, we remember the people who have been creating those Goddard of the US. And also Russian Tsiolkovsky and Korolev, and it's interesting to watch the timeline. If Tsiolkovsky was born 150 years ago, 50 years after him, Korolev was born 50 years after that, Sputnik was launched, and 50 years later we are sitting here, and in orbit we have an international crew who is working on the International Space Station, a Russian-American crew. international crew, how quickly the civilization is progressing in developing space. Gagarin's launch and the first Armstrong step on the surface of the moon, those are the events that are unforgettable. Of course, we remember the cold times when we were looking at each other from the different sides of the ocean. And maybe only in 1975 there was that warming up in the international climate, and the Soyuz Apollo project came about. Alexei Leonov, who was a participant of that project, was also invited for that conference, for that event that had to do with the 50th anniversary of Sputnik launch. Unfortunately, he was not able to come. He has been very busy lately, but right before I arrived here, I have seen him, and he asked me to please congratulate you all with this great event and wish you good health. Then, after such a long break, after Soyuz Apollo, we had a long break when we didn't communicate that close. Only in 1992, after the interstate agreement that was signed, we started the Shuttle Mir program. I was very happy to be able to participate in this program. In 1992, sometime in the summer, the Star City was visited by the chief administrator of NASA, and I was showing him around. I made a joke. I said I was selected to become a cosmonaut as a cosmonaut who will be flying on the Buran vehicle, which is a version of shuttle program. And I said the program has changed, but now I would like to fly on your shuttle. And he said, okay, and I will fly on Soyuz then. And then we shook hands. A couple months ago, in November of '92, Sergei Krikalev and myself came here to Houston. It was very interesting. When we came to the building where the astronaut office is located, in the halls we had slogans, Russians are coming. It was cute. And then, later on we arrived, there was another slogan there. It said that Russians are here. And after that we started training. It was very difficult. Because we didn't really know English, and it was a big problem for us. The first month and a half, we had interpreters with us, just the same girls that are sitting here, helping us out. And after that, we started working by ourselves, by learning technology without interpreters. We actually contributed into the process of studying. I remember the instructor came over and brought us a huge pile of paper, and he said, tomorrow we are going to study, tomorrow we are going to train. Sergei and myself was shocked. We said, let's do it the other way. Let's have a different approach. Please give us a series of light lectures, but do not just read the theory. Show us pictures, show us the schematics of the systems, of the modules, and it will be easier for us to find common language. And this is how we brought the experience that we brought the experience from the Star City to here for studying, and then it became much easier for us to learn the technology, because engineering knowledge helped us in studying English. Actually, without having any kind of language base, we were able to understand each other much better. This is how we were helping each other. we were learning from each other. We learned to respect each other. It is not a secret that at the beginning of this program, not everybody was viewing this program as an important program. Not everybody liked it. There were some who thought that it wasn't necessary to deal with the Russians. However, in about a year and a half of Krikolov's and mine studies here at Johnson Space Center, our colleagues and I had an opportunity to get to know each other better, and we realized that we can be successful in working together. And you can see that we're continuing our cooperation on the International Space Station project. And
Transfer to English?
Перейти на английский язык?
It's okay.
Okay, okay.
Go to channel 2.
Go to channel 1, please.
Мне посчастливилось.
And I was lucky.
Working?
Channel 1, please.
Okay, good. And
so I was fortunate enough in the course of our training to get acquainted with Mr. Abe. And I recall the time, which happened much later, on Saturdays, George would gather the entire United States for a telecon.
I'm talking about you a little bit.
So on Saturdays, the entire of the United States, the space community at least, participated in Saturday telecons. It is, of course, a weekend, and that testified how great were the efforts to supporting the work of International Space Station. All the space centers were participating in these telecons. Essentially, everybody was participating in the telecon. Everybody had to report, had to give status reports. And I know that today, George was awarded a medal, and I would like to say that he needs to get another medal, maybe 2 or 3, because his contribution to the International Space Station project was absolutely incredible. And of course, in conclusion, I don't want to be too long-winded. I wanted to say that this grandiose event, the launch of the first artificial satellite, united all of us. Sergei Krikolov and I were the first Russians in Houston. However, today, if you go to Clear Lake, you will hear Russian everywhere. You will see Russians in every corner. And nobody is afraid of them, which is the most amazing thing. And I would like to express my gratitude to all of you. You're a very kind nation, and there's a lot we can learn from you. And of course, we will be happy to share with you whatever experience we have. I hope that we will continue our cooperation in the future, and I hope that the next generation of cosmonauts, astronauts, scientists, and engineers will continue to work on our projects. Thank you for your attention.
Sergei
Avdeyev, whom you had an opportunity to see before. I think I will continue in Russian as well. Just like Vladimir, I think that our U.S. colleagues, our US astronauts whom we had a privilege to work with had as much impact on space program development as probably the launch of Sputnik. I was working on Mir station, which was built in the Soviet Union, and after that, using our experience of working on this station, station number 8, we started working on the ISS project. You all had an opportunity to see the film in the beginning of our meeting. Every time I participated in meetings together with him, I noticed that he would look around and he will look for young people in the audience. All of his speeches, all of his words were addressed not so much to the people who had work experience in space industry, but he addressed his words towards the new generation. Now I'm looking at the audience here and I can see that there are a lot of young people, a lot of students, and I had an opportunity to meet some of you prior to this panel discussion. I think there are a lot of things that we can't describe in detail within 3 or 4 minutes of our remarks. However, perhaps we could meet during breaks and maybe we'll be able to answer the questions that you have, and maybe that would be even more effective. I just wanted to say that throughout my experience of working on Mir station, this station was a prototype for the International Space Station. In all 4 missions, I worked with international astronauts, astronauts from Europe, from France, for example, or Slovakia. We worked with representatives of European Space Agency. Together with them, we began working on very special missions, missions when you didn't really distinguish between Russian and international crew members. These missions would take 6 months. After that, we started working on Mir shuttle program. This was another step towards the project of International Space Station. We began to work with U.S. astronauts, U.S. scientists. Opportunity to participate in joint programs allowed us to intertwine the work of European, Russian, and U.S. agencies. And so it was difficult to say which country was the original source of the projects and experiments that we were performing in space. During my second mission, I was working together with Thomas Ryder. It was increment 20 on board Mir station. Of course, we prepared for this mission prior to launch. We didn't just spend studying time together, but we would visit each other's families. And when we came on board the station, we had this rule that all international crew members had to know Russian language so we could speak Russian. So during this mission with Thomas Ryder, I remember one particular episode. Thomas Ryder has a separate press conference on board. He was talking to the media, he was talking alone to the people in Germany. And so we prepared the setting for him. We turned on the lights, prepared the microphones, and left Thomas to do this public affairs event. And we went off to perform our work on the station. However, when we would go by Thomas, I found out that he was speaking in German. I was very surprised because we lived as a crew for so long, we worked together for so long. But it was the first time when I realized that I was working with a person from another country. Even though he was always viewed as a representative of Europe, he was always one of us. And so that's an example of how united we feel when we're in space. The space truly does not have any borders. Everyone is there together. Everything is connected. During our conference here in the US, there are presentations which show a lot of interesting things, show how we work jointly together, and also shows us what problems we might face in the future when we continue space exploration. Example would be the following. Imagine 1957. Imagine our globe and imagine Sputnik orbiting the Earth. Now, let's get back to the present day. Instead of just one orbiting satellite, we have many satellites orbiting the Earth. And they can be used not only for peaceful purposes, but they can also threaten not only each other, but also those who live on Earth. So we're faced with the question, what impact does the space exploration have on our life here on Earth? I think that Sputnik, which was launched 50 years ago, opened a new window for our cooperation in space. And I will be happy to answer all the questions you might have for me, and not just here during our panel discussions, but also afterwards. Thank you.
Professor Oleg Alifanov, Dean of Aerospace Technologies of Moscow Aviation Institute.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends. I
think this would be the extent of my English for this evening, and I will join my Russian colleagues and will speak in Russian. Vladimir Titov said that he was too young to participate in the launch of the first Sputnik, and although I'm a little bit older than he is, I also was in the next generation. So when the Sputnik was launched, I was still in school. I just remember that when we were boys, we would run out at some particular time and determine which one of the dots in the sky was the Sputnik, but we never were successful in determining that. And it is true that after October the 4th, the world has changed. For 50 years now, we've been living in the space age. And so, after being a schoolboy, I became a student in Moscow Aviation Institute, then a professor. But even in my dreams, I couldn't imagine that one day the Cold War will be over, and that from a competition in space we'll be able to turn to cooperation, and that a day will come when we will be able to gather together this wonderful room and speak with the specialists in space industry, and that we will be able to have a friendly discussion about our progress.
I was lucky in a sense that my professors at the university were those who actually built the first rockets and created the first satellite, the first Sputnik. And here we talked a lot about the people who were the stars in that program. Of course, that would be Sergei Korolev. Of course, that would be Werner von Braun. And probably they were the main two founders of practical cosmonautics. Our great veteran Boris Chertok, whom we saw in the video, also mentioned another scientist, Isaac Newton. I would allow myself to remember Kepler. He is a German mathematician who was the first to mathematically calculate the movement of solar universe of planets in the universe. And I just recently found out that he spent 10 years to write a book about what a human being would see and would feel when the person would come to the moon for the first time. What is most amazing is that it was very close to the truth, to what the American astronauts actually experienced on the surface of the moon. And what he wrote, that happened in the 17th century. I would remember another bright personality that would be Kibalchich. Kibalchich is a Russian revolutionary who is famous for two reasons. First is that he attempted to assassinate Alexander II, the Russian Tsar, for which he was to be assassinated himself, killed himself. And he actually developed the work being in jail, and the work was the basics of the aeronautics, human flight in space. And in that work, in that book, I think it was the first time, I don't really know of another source, that was the first time mentioned in that book, to use the principle of reactive movement in air. And it is easy to extrapolate his idea to the flight in space. So when he finished his book several years later, he was killed. I think it wasn't a funny thing for him. Anyway, Coming back to my teachers, I would like to honor such close associates of Korolev. One of them you saw today on the video, and the first deputy of Korolev was Vasily Mishin. He was the first deputy starting in 1946 through 1966 when he passed away. And then he became the chief designer of the rocket systems. Since he at the same time was the dean of the space department of the institute, and I was one of his students. That's why I know him personally, starting in 1963. And after he became the full professor of the Moscow Aviation Institute in 1974, became even closer with him, and I had the chance to have very interesting conversations with him. He told me a lot of stories about how the rocket industry was started. And this famous rocket that was used to launch the first Sputnik, it was called the seventh. Technical decisions, a lot of them were conceived together with Korolev by Professor Mishin. And I don't know if you care for that or not, but I'm telling you these things. The suspension of the rocket, up to the armpits, to alleviate the load. This is the idea of Professor Mishin, and also the idea to assemble not vertically but horizontally in the workshop. That was also his idea. Also the thrusters that are suspended, that was also his idea. Actually, what I want to say is that Korolev was not working by himself. He was surrounded by the constellation of very talented engineers. Also another person, Sergei Akhapkin. He was also a deputy of Korolev. He was the structural designer of the ballistic rockets and other systems. Also another person who was designing the launch facilities, it would be Anatoly Abramov. I think in this audience it is my duty to say that these people did a lot and they contributed a whole deal to the development of the Russian space technology. I am very pleased that this meeting, this conversation is happening right here at your university. I have to say that in Russia we celebrated that event not as much as it was in the West. In March, UNESCO, together with the Astrophysics Federation, held a symposium. In September, there was an International Astronautical Congress in India. In September, in Russia, we also had meetings. But what is happening here today, this is probably the final celebration of this event, since we had the series already all over the world, as you can see. And we are celebrating the event that happened 50 years ago. That's why I would like to join the other speakers who already thanked the people who put together this meeting. First of all, George Abbey, and thank you very much. You are the participants of this glorious meeting. I wish you all the best, health, happiness and luck in everything.
So now we reached the last panelist, Sergei Leskov, who is very prominent columnist of famous Izvestia newspaper. He writes a lot about space issues also.
I will be true to the tradition. I will speak Russian as the practice demonstrates of concerts. I'm talking about the last event, the last show should be an entertainment kind. So I'm not going to talk anything smart, especially because I'm not a scientist. What could you expect from a journalist? I will tell you a few, I think, educational and amusing stories about people whom we saw today on the screen and who are also present here. Boris Chertok, who was reading the text of the Russian film, he is 94 years old at the moment. Was it 95? Yeah, he just had a birthday. He's 95. Interesting how he lives, you know. 20 years ago, he quit smoking. He said, I quit smoking a long time ago, 20 years ago. Previously, he smoked only papyrosas, which is not cigarettes, without filter. Without filter. This is what the drug users use, I guess, here. The technique. Till now he is driving. He drives to work to Energia Corporation from the VDNH area. You probably know it if you've been to Moscow. He drives himself. Until the last year he's been using Volga. Volga is a Soviet car. It's a good one, but it does not have any accelerator. It's like without power steering. Without power steering. I mean, I was saying that a female will not be able to drive the Volga. Boris's son are very worried about him when he drives. That's why they have a trick. When it is time to change the tires winter to summer or summer to winter, they try to procrastinate as long as possible the process of exchange so that he will not be driving at this time, and that makes him very mad. I said that he quit smoking, but he still uses alcohol. Every time I visit him after our conversation, he offers me a drink, and he drinks himself. He actually prefers two types of drinks. He likes whiskey and he likes cognac. I think it's good for his health. And I mean, for some reason, I think it is connected that he lives so long by having these drinks. So the Russian Soviet designers, Korolev, Lushko, Tupolev, all of them actually have been in prison during Stalin's time, but Chertok was not in prison. It is interesting. I asked him, why, Boris, you did not actually end up in jail during Stalin time, and he told me the following story. When he was a student of the Moscow Energy Institute, he was working at a design bureau with Tupolev, and he was a participant in training Lewandowski to over the North Pole. You know that Chkalov was successful in his flying over North Pole, but after him Lewandowski was supposed to fly, but he actually didn't make it. So Boris was not a student, he was working, and he had to catch up with his studies. He brought a paper to the institute so that he will be delayed for such and such reason because he is a participant of this program, and the party dignitary Mr. Malenkov had a wife, his name was Golubkina, who was actually working in that party organization, to where he had to bring that paper so that he will be able to catch up with his studies. And when she saw that paper, she started yelling, "What did you bring it to me? Tupolev was just put in jail today." So she warned him. You know, everything was decided within minutes. So you see, if he would bring that paper to somebody else, we would not see that person on the screen. He would probably be dead by now. So she saved him. So if not for joking, for me, it is a mystery, and it is a paradox of the Soviet system. What I'm talking about, that the scientists who have always been in danger of being murdered by the system were working devoted. They were doing everything they could to support the system that was putting their own lives, their own beings in danger. They were doing everything to strengthen that regime. However, science requires freedom. Why, would I ask myself, when this freedom actually appeared in the Soviet Union, the Soviet science became so much less productive? I cannot answer that question. However, it is a problem that I think about sometime. So the first Sputnik was launched. It did its mission. Also, I wanted to say that Peenemünde was occupied by the Soviets, but no, actually Peenemünde was occupied by the Americans, and then it was exchanged for the West Berlin. And also, you know, we can say that there was a mistake in Russian political strategy, and maybe if Americans would not to give away the Peenemünde to West Berlin, East Berlin, and probably we would not be able to take advantage of the science baggage of the Germans, who actually transferred that to the Soviets. We have to say that the Russian designers were amazed. They were at awe at Pau-2 rocket technology. We had rockets in the Soviet Union too. Nobody understood how powerful that Pau-2 rocket was, and the thrust of Pau-2 rocket was 150 times greater than any Soviet rocket at that time. And when the Soviet designers saw what the Germans have created, they were amazed. Pau-2 rockets were flying on alcohol. It is funny, as far as I know, US is going to the biofuel right now, and actually 20% of the US cars using biological fuel is probably using schnapps for fuel was a good idea, and it was a German idea. There is also an interesting story about how Korolev was persuading army generals that oxygen and hydrogen are more effective than alcohol. he was asked how much alcohol do you need to put in the rocket so it would fly. He said 20 or 30,000 tons. And the general said, give us that much alcohol and we would take over any city without firing a single shot. I think this audience probably saw Armageddon with Bruce Willis in the main role, right? Probably everybody has seen that. You remember one of the main heroes is the Russian cosmonaut played by Yevgeny Sidikhin, who is kind of popular in Russia, but for some reason not so popular in Hollywood. He was trying to fix the station using a hammer, remember? Actually, he fixed it, by the way, and saved the project. But let's ask another question. Is this image justified? Maybe it is comical and has nothing to do with the reality, is it? No. This is actually justified. Veterans of the space activity told me a few stories that help us to draw a parallel with Armageddon comical cosmonaut hero. There was such a case when, by the way, this particular case became the reason why I speak Russian and not English. I will explain later. The case was like that. From the command post, Korolev and his surrounding saw that there was a leak in the fuel lines of the rocket. They decided to cancel the launch. But Mr. Leonid Voskresensky, who was close to Korolev, by the way, in Russian you can say somebody you in a familiar way or you in a polite way. And he was the one who was actually talking to him in a familiar way. And Chertok was the only second person who was able to address Mr. Korolev in a familiar way. Okay, so Leonid Voskresensky saw the leak and he started walking towards the steaming rocket. Everybody was trying to call him back. Voskresensky came close to the rocket. He looked closely at the place of the leak. He took off his hat. He went around the corner. He did something with his hat there. Then he went back to the pipe, to the steaming pipe. He put his hat on the pipe and the leak stopped. Anybody who is educated in chemistry would understand what he did. What he did, he peed on his hat, and nitrogen got hard and plugged the leak. When the launch occurred, he took that hat and he washed it, and he was using it for quite a few years afterwards. Okay. But, you know, the reality is always comical and tragical all at once. And perhaps it is because Voskresensky was so close to Korolev, allowed him to argue with the great scientist to the last word. And when space race was about to be lost by the Soviet Union, because, you know, the Russians were trying to get to the moon before the US side, but then
Korolev made a decision that he will not perform ground tests and he will not test first stage of the rocket. He basically did not insist for the facilities, for the testing facilities to be built. And that's when the two friends, the two colleagues, had a quarrel, and as a result, Voskresensky had to leave Energia, and Energia Institute was called something else at the time. And in 2 months, he died from a heart attack. That was the end of 1965. A month after that, Korolev died also. So you see how we have all these comical events, and then there is a tragedy. But I think I should probably tell you something about U.S.-Russian cooperation. And you know, Soyuz Apollon project, and the main pilots during that project were Thomas Stafford and Alexei Leonov. However, probably few of you know that Alexei Leonov was almost kicked out from the cosmonaut corps after that. Here's what happened. Stargov and Leonov presented Mr. Yeltsin a watch that was on orbit. It was a very special watch. It was inscribed, it said NASA and something else. And so Yeltsin was presented with this watch. And during a press conference, which was broadcast all over the world, Brezhnev was like a child. He loved foreign cars, he loved foreign gifts, watches, etc. So the entire press conference, he was looking at this watch, and he was showing to Leonov, let me see the watch, let me see the watch. And Leonov was saying, yeah, I have a watch too. And our defense minister was able to see this press conference, and he didn't see gesticulations of Brezhnev. He saw that Leonov was pointing at his watch as if to show that it's time to wrap things up. And defense minister was someone called Grechko, and so he, together with his colleagues, decided that this outrageous cosmonaut should be kicked out from the cosmonaut corps, but Leonov was miraculously saved when one of the scientists stood up for him, and as you know, scientists can be very persuasive, and so he was saying that all the gesticulations were sort of a friendly way, a friendly exchange between the leader and the cosmonaut. And so, in conclusion, I wanted to say that the main impact of Soyuz Apollon was adoption by Thomas Stafford of 2 Russian boys. Of course, he is not publicizing the event. Cosmonaut Leonov was helping Stafford to adopt these 2 Russian boys, whom he called Thomas and Alexei. This was a symbolic gesture which shows that our prolonged, sometimes amusing, sometimes dramatic experience of space exploration allowed the US and Russia to get closer, and allowed us to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been an extraordinary set of presentations. We're going to have questions in a second. The stories of comedy and tragedy, and there's been more alcohol this evening than I expected. Bodily functions. innovative processes involving hats and so forth. And I'm sure there are many stories that we didn't have a chance to tell this evening. We have time for a few questions. Because of the translation that's going on, it's very important that you take your questions to the microphones and ask them at the microphone so that our interpreters can hear your questions. So please, anybody have a question? You may ask it either in English or Russian, perhaps other languages that the members of our panel speak. And let me start with we have a question. Yes, please, on the right.
Yeah, since this is for Dr. Sagiev.
Are you hearing up here? The microphone's on?
There's a switch on the side.
It's on.
It's on. Thank you. Yeah.
They're probably hearing. Can you hear me now? Excellent. Okay. This question is mostly for Dr. Sagiev. Since the formation of NASA, even to the present, as the United States prepares to go back to the moon with human crews, there's been a strong polarity between robotic missions to the planets and so on, and human space flight. Can you characterize what that was like? Was there a similar polarization in the former Soviet Union, say, with Iki and Lavochkin compared to CPK and manned flight?
There was some polarization, but it was on the background. Scientific community majority would have preferred robotic missions, more efficient, more convenient to bring interesting scientific results. But the general trend of the aerospace program in Russia was, of course, to have something really spectacular. And also early romanticism was driving these piloted flights. So eventually one of the party congresses, I think it was the 25th party congress, Brezhnev spelled, there was a special paragraph in his speech that the orbital stations is a priority in developing Soviet space program, and he was using it as a political instrument. He was inviting at every meeting with a foreign head of foreign state, if it would be friendly, like, you know, from socialist, so-called socialist countries, or France, which with whom we had a special relations. Brezhnev would deliver ticket. Would you send a cosmonaut? We will take it to space.
You even yes, Francois, so that we can get the translation. Thank you.
I would like to say thank you very much to the participants for this extraordinary conference. But although it brings enormous nostalgia, could we talk a little bit about the future? Or is that not possible?
I think so. The future with regard to in U.S. partnerships with Russia, and yes. So would one of you like to start that response on how we see the future, because much has changed and is changing in this country and in Russia, and of course there's China rapidly growing and with interest in space. But what would you have to say about the future? Will we have a future golden age of cooperation and in space? Dr. Levy.
One of the reasons that we tend to dwell on the past and talk about the past is that the past has an advantage over the future. That it has happened and we know what it is. The future is speculative, and I would say that right now, from my perspective, the future of the space program is cloudy. In that it is difficult to perceive, I believe, where the programs are going. It's difficult to perceive certainly where the American program is going. It has been formulated around a vision for space exploration, which is a very ambitious program to take human beings back to the moon. But to take human beings back to the moon with a level of ambition and a modality of operational capability on the moon that far transcends the brief visits that were made during the Apollo program. I think that is a very exciting prospect. It has several consequences. One is that it is likely to be extraordinarily expensive. I think far more expensive than we than we admit as we sit here today. If to achieve the operational capability on the moon, I think we have vastly underestimated the cost and vastly overestimated the ease and alacrity with which that will be done. And so I think it's very, very hard to predict. The space station, which has been an extremely interesting program and of mixed aspects. The space shuttle, which I think has been also an extraordinary and in my view, quite successful program in many respects. Both of these turned out to be vastly more expensive than had been estimated at the time. I would remind you that when the space station was first proposed in the 1980s, the entire program budget was estimated to be $8 billion. In fact, by the time $8 billion was spent, not a single screw had been made. And so these are very, very expensive endeavors. They're very ambitious, they're very expensive, and we need to understand what commitment is needed to make them happen. At the same time, I think we have to think very carefully about the question that was asked over here, about the balance between robotic and human exploration of space. Both of these are extremely valuable, extremely important activities. The challenge that we have is to figure out how we carry out these very important activities within the envelope of investment that we are prepared to make. And when I say we, I mean not just one nation, of course, but the extent to which the several nations that are committed in this, or seem to be committed, will be prepared to work together and combine their investment. I would argue probably that even if all of the nations that are currently thinking about going to the moon were to work together on single projects, it would still be a stretch, and not obviously a stretch that we would succeed at to achieve the level of operational capability that's being talked about in the vision. So it's a very, very exciting vision. I worry personally about the balance of the program and whether we will be able to sustain the extraordinary momentum that I referred to that was started by Sputnik and that we have seen the fruits of. Whether we can sustain that for the next 50 years, my crystal ball doesn't quite penetrate that far.
Would other panelists like to comment on this question? Maybe I can amend the question a little bit. When President Bush's exploration initiative was announced, the way in which it was announced struck many of us as this will be a U.S.-led effort. And very little was said, at least in my recollection, and George Abbey and I have written about this issue, very little was said to acknowledge the importance of the U.S.-Russian cooperation in space up to that time, and very little was said by way of welcoming a future strong partnership. That was our sense in how this program looked. But I wonder if I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if anyone could comment on whether U.S.-Russian cooperation in space activities has simply continued strong and in a positive direction, or has been somewhat less less obviously welcoming on both sides, or is anything you can say about U.S.-Russian cooperation in space in recent years?
Can I add a couple of words?
Please, Roll.
In general, I would agree with what my old dear friend Jean said about some concerns related to this vision of new vision of space exploration. But I think when he started with the premise that relationship between past and future, I'm sure George Orwell would disagree with him. At least his interpretation of the Soviet philosophy, Soviet approach, was future is always bright, but it is past which was unpredictable. But let me...
I have to interrupt. There's actually a NASA corollary to that premise, and it has consistently infused the program, and that is that this year's budget is troublesome, but next year things look great.
So one particular prediction I think we all can make, and I'm sure our distinguished panelists, cosmonauts would agree, and astronauts, that 2010 NASA announced that shuttle flights would be terminated, shuttle would retire. Then there obviously will be gap between termination of shuttle flights and new vehicle coming into the being, the crew exploration vehicle. How long would be this gap? 2 years? Well, unlikely. It could go to 4, 5, maybe 6 years. What's going to happen is unbelievable. You saw R7, the first rocket, which was originated in 1954. Korolev made it as ICBM. Then it launched first Sputnik. With a very few modifications, it's flying now under the different name, Soyuz. So it is a major trophy NASA got for winning space race from Russians. It's going to use it.
Можно два слова, да?
May I say a few words?
Слышно? Вот мне бы хотелось
I would like
вот перейти от как бы задач тактических
to move from tactical tasks, space shuttles, Soyuz, space station, to global tasks, strategical tasks. Remember, when California was burning, who was counting the money, how much it will cost to stop the fires? They had to be stopped.
Я думаю, что когда начнет гибнуть Земля, когда у нас истощаются все запасы,
will become being really depleted. We will not be counting the money, how much it will cost to save the humanity and find the resources in space and fly to another planet. Who is going to count the money? That's why space exploration is not science for the sake of science. This is the science for the survival of humanity. That's all I wanted to say. That's my vision.
Владимир Титов очень
Vladimir
точно сказал,
Titov was very
я хочу вот что
specific.
добавить.
I want to add
Первый росток
that the first sprout of cooperation between the US and Russia was Apollo-Soyuz project.
Ну, а, наверное, вершина
And the top of this cooperation would be the International Space Station. I believe this cooperation should be cherished. It should be kept. When we talk about great projects as going back to the moon and colonization of the moon, also flights to Mars. Actually, the moon, the space, this is the common property, and these projects should be carried out together by the whole humanity. That would be correct from every point of view, from the point of view of resources. And any country, even if it is a rich country, that would be hard to pull. I think economically it can be resolved more rationally. Also, there is a philosophical and political sense in that. I want to add that it is very important for us to teach our young explorers of space, even those who still go to the middle school, they need to learn friendship and cooperation in exploring space, in learning to live in space. Today, in the meeting that was organized by two professors, Professor Alex Ignatieff and Professor Larry Bell, we discussed one project that was presented by me. It is a project about creating an international educational satellite system that can be used and be useful by students of schools and universities. And not only those universities that are specializing in space, but also it will be useful for the universities that teach these specialists that would be using the results of space exploration in other areas, even humanitarian types of science. If we had such a joint project, I thought that would be very beneficial, and it would be a great contribution to what was saying here, that the young people, as they become creative, they become adults, they would understand that such cooperation is important and it is an integral part of it. I decided to say a few words about cooperation because everybody is calling for cooperation, but but you know, it's not so unanimous. I think cooperation, also cooperation in space, cannot always be beneficial, and I will explain why. In the contemporary society, any country, as the polls show, is proud of three things. That would be the number of Nobel Prize winners, also space exploration and sports achievements. Please look at this. The Nobel Prize winners will always have a nationality. The sports winners, with the exception of tennis, probably has to do with a certain country, usually. Space achievements is very important. And while we do have countries, it is actually national achievements. They are also national achievements. This will be the air that the nation is breathing, that they are proud of. They would be the reason why they are proud of their country. And they would want to pull further down. In more and more countries want to go into space exploration. Even Brazil, for example, they probably would be easier for them to buy a satellite from Russia or from the US, or maybe they would ask Russia or the US to use their launch vehicles. For some reason, Brazil, India, and other countries, what they're trying to do, they're trying to develop their own space program.
program. There will be national space program for the same reason, for the reason of this impetus that gives the space exploration to the progress of the country. Of course, there are projects that are more effective and productive when there is cooperation in place. However, every time we have to think about the real situation, what exactly is better to do together and what can be achieved better by yourself, so you will have something to be proud of. If in the 50th Eisenhower and Khrushchev would start to explore space together, I don't think we will see Gagarin, we will see Armstrong. I don't think they will be able to achieve anything. I don't think humanity will be in space if they would start cooperating together, US and Russia, at that time. Only competition allowed the modern achievements to come about. That's all. Thanks.
I appreciate all of those comments. It may be that before any of us get back to the moon, we will have found intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, and therefore we will all land together as one world in competition with others in the universe. I think we've had a wonderful discussion. I know that our colleagues on the panel would enjoy meeting those of you who they haven't met, but I think in the interest of the hour, we should thank them and congratulate George Abbey all in one time.
Well, thank you, Neil, but I would personally like to thank all the panelists and all the people that helped make this program such a great program. I appreciate all the good work and help that Rolf Sagdeev has provided to make this program happen, and Gene Levy and Vladimir and Sergey and Oleg and Sergey, and you too, Neil. So thank you and all the many people that helped put it together. It's a great evening, and hopefully you'll be able to meet the panelists and talk a little bit outside. I think there probably maybe sell some wine and maybe some food. So thank you all.